The asteroid belt held secrets that most miners never bothered to look for. But David Chen was different from most miners. Always had been since he started working the Outer Rim colonies 5 years ago. While others rushed through their extraction quotas, David took time to examine the strange formations and unusual mineral deposits that caught his eye during the long shifts aboard the Horizon's edge. This particular asteroid was wrong in ways that made his engineering instincts buzz with curiosity. The metal readings showed standard iron and nickel, but the electromagnetic signatures were all scrambled, like something was interfering with the scanning equipment from deep inside the rock. And when David suited up for the manual inspection, he found himself drawn to a section where the asteroid's surface seemed to shimmer with an oily rainbow sheen. The drilling took 3 hours longer than it should have, mainly because David kept stopping to stare at what he was uncovering. Beneath the rough exterior lay something that definitely wasn't natural asteroid material, something smooth and translucent that pulsed with its own inner light, like a giant egg made of crystal and starlight wrapped together in impossible ways. When David's drill finally broke through the last layer of protective rock, the crystalline pod began to crack with sounds like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. And from within emerged something that made David forget every regulation about first contact protocols and alien specimen handling procedures. A creature no bigger than his forearm, covered in scales that shifted color from deep blue to silver to gold depending on how the light hit them. The baby dragon, because that was the only word that fit, even though David knew dragons were supposed to be mythology, looked up at him with eyes that held more intelligence than any animal had a right to possess. Eyes that seemed to see straight through his helmet and into his soul, making soft chirping sounds that somehow conveyed curiosity rather than fear. David found himself reaching out with a gloved hand, moving slowly so as not to frighten the tiny creature, and when it didn't pull away, he gently stroked the smooth scales along its neck, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with connection, like touching sunlight made solid. The dragon followed him back to the ship without any coaxing, settling into the maintenance bay like it belonged there, watching everything David did with those remarkable eyes, occasionally making soft, trilling sounds that almost sounded like questions. And when David offered it some of his water ration from a maintenance bottle, the creature looked at the container with obvious recognition. "Bottle," the dragon said clearly, its voice small but perfectly formed, and David nearly dropped the container in shock because he had been prepared for many things during his career in deep space, but he had definitely not been prepared for a baby dragon that could speak perfect standard English within minutes of hatching. The word hung in the air between them like a bridge, and David realized that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. Here was a creature that had somehow learned human language just by listening to him talk to himself during the mining operation, a being that represented first contact with an intelligent alien species, and all it wanted was a drink from his water bottle. David spent the next few hours trying to process what had happened while the dragon explored the maintenance bay, always staying close to him, occasionally pointing at objects and repeating their names in that clear musical voice, learning new words at a rate that defied everything David thought he knew about language acquisition and animal intelligence. When the rest of the crew discovered David's find, the reaction was everything he had expected and more. Chief Engineer Rodriguez nearly fainted. Communications Officer Kim started babbling about protocols and regulations, and Dr. Lisa Martinez, the ship's xenobiologist, went completely silent for 10 minutes before launching into a stream of questions that made David's head spin. The dragon seemed fascinated by the attention, greeting each new person with polite curiosity, repeating their names back to them with perfect pronunciation, and demonstrating an understanding of basic concepts that suggested intelligence far beyond what its small size would indicate, even managing to distinguish between individual crew members and remember their preferences. Captain Roberts took the news with the calm professionalism that had earned him command of a deep space mining vessel. But David could see the excitement and worry warring behind his eyes. Excitement because they had made the discovery of the century. Worry because first contact situations were supposed to be handled by trained diplomats and xenobiologists. "Not maintenance engineers and mining crews, what do we do now?" asked Rodriguez, staring at the dragon as it curled up in David's lap, still clutching the water bottle like a treasured possession. And David realized that despite all his training and experience, He had no idea how to answer that question, Doctor. Martinez ran preliminary scans that revealed the dragon's biology was unlike anything in the known database. Carbon-based like Earth life, but with cellular structures that seemed to incorporate elements that shouldn't have been possible, including what appeared to be naturally occurring quantum processors in its neural tissue that might explain its rapid language learning abilities. The dragon seemed to enjoy the attention, cooperating with the scans and examinations, occasionally commenting on the equipment with observations that showed it understood the purpose of the medical instruments better than it had any right to, making jokes about the ticklish sensation of the bioscanners that had the entire crew laughing. Despite their nervousness as ship's night cycle approached, David found himself faced with the question of where the dragon should sleep and when. He offered to set up a comfortable area in the maintenance bay. The creature simply looked at him and said, "With bottle, friend," in a tone that suggested the matter was already settled. David discovered that having a baby dragon curled up next to his bunk was simultaneously the most natural and most surreal experience of his life. The creature radiated warmth and contentment, occasionally making soft humming sounds in its sleep. And when David woke in the middle of the night cycle, he found the dragon watching him with those intelligent eyes, as if making sure he was safe. "Thank you," the dragon whispered in the darkness, and David realized that whatever had brought this creature into his life, he was going to protect it with everything he had, because some things were more important than regulations and procedures, and sometimes the most important discoveries came not from following protocols, but from simply offering a drink to someone who was thirsty. 3 days had passed since the dragon's emergence from the crystal pod, and David watched in amazement as the creature he had started calling Spark demonstrated learning abilities that defied everything the crew thought they knew about intelligence and language acquisition, absorbing new concepts at a rate that left Dr. Martinez frantically taking notes and muttering about neural plasticity coefficients that shouldn't exist in nature. Spark had grown noticeably larger, now about the size of a medium dog, with scales that seemed to shift through the entire spectrum depending on its mood and the lighting conditions. But more remarkable than its physical development was the way it processed human language, moving from simple words to complex sentences in a matter of hours, as if its brain was designed specifically for rapid communication adaptation. "Tell me about the stars," Spark said during breakfast on the 4th day, pointing at the viewport that showed the asteroid field where it had been discovered, and when. David pulled up the navigation charts on his tablet. Spark studied them with an intensity that made the maintenance engineer uncomfortable. As if the patterns meant something significant that humans couldn't understand, Dr. Martinez had been running continuous scans on Spark's neural development, discovering that the dragon's brain showed activity patterns unlike any known species, with quantum-level processing occurring in specialized cells that seemed to store and access information in ways that bordered on impossible, according to current scientific understanding. "My brain is different," Spark explained when Martinez tried to describe the scan results in simple terms. "It holds memories that are not mine, memories from the big ones who came before, who taught the small ones like me before they went away to the place where dragons sleep forever." The implications of inherited memories sent shockwaves through the crew. If Spark could access the experiences and knowledge of its predecessors, it might hold information about an entire civilization that had existed long before humans ventured into space, a species that had achieved interstellar travel, and possibly much more. David found himself spending most of his off-duty hours with Spark, partly because the dragon seemed most comfortable with him, but also because he was fascinated by the creature's perspective on human behavior and technology. Observations that showed an understanding of engineering principles that should have taken years of study to acquire. "Your engines make the space bend," Spark commented while watching David perform routine maintenance. "But they do it roughly, like a child trying to fold paper." The big dragons knew how to ask space nicely, how to move through it without causing ripples that hurt the quiet places between stars. When Captain Roberts asked Spark about its species and their technology, the dragon's expression grew sad in a way that transcended species barriers, and its scales dimmed to a mournful gray-blue that made everyone in the room feel an echo of its grief, even though none of them fully understood what they were witnessing. "The big dragons were the watchers and the teachers," Spark explained, curling up in David's lap like it always did when discussing difficult topics. They helped the young races learn to reach for stars without breaking the harmony. But the angry ones came with ships that screamed through space, ships that took instead of giving. The crew learned that Spark's people had been pacifists by nature, using their advanced understanding of physics and consciousness to guide younger species toward peaceful expansion, but they had been unprepared for the aggressive expansion of what Spark called the empire that fears thoughts, a militaristic civilization that viewed psychic abilities as threats to be eliminated. Dr. Martinez's research revealed that Spark's species possessed natural telepathic abilities that allowed them to sense emotions and intentions across vast distances, capabilities that would have made them invaluable as diplomats and mediators, but also dangerous enemies for any species that preferred conquest to cooperation. "We never learned to fight," Spark said quietly. "The big dragons thought all creatures could be taught kindness if shown patience. But the angry empire did not want to learn. They wanted to take and control, and they feared what we could show other species about living in peace." David felt a chill as he realized that Spark might be describing genocide on a galactic scale, the systematic elimination of an entire species, not for resources or territory, but because their very existence threatened the expansion of an authoritarian empire that couldn't tolerate the idea of guided peaceful development. The dragons inherited memories contained fragments of the final days of its species, images of crystal cities being shattered by energy weapons, of desperate parents hiding their young in stasis pods scattered across the galaxy, of proud beings who had never known, or dying without understanding why their offers of friendship were met with violence. "How many of you survived?" asked Captain Roberts gently, and Spark's response sent another wave of sadness through the assembled crew. The dragon could sense only a few dozen heartbeats scattered across the vast emptiness of space, the last remnants of a civilization that had once spanned thousands of worlds. Dr. Martinez discovered that Spark's rapid growth wasn't just physical and mental, but also psychic. The dragon's telepathic abilities were strengthening daily, allowing it to sense the emotions and surface thoughts of the crew, though it was careful to respect their privacy, and only accessed deeper thoughts when specifically invited. "David thinks in colors," Spark announced one evening, causing the maintenance engineer to blush. "Blue for worry, green for curiosity, gold for the warm feeling when helping others. It is beautiful, like watching Aurora dance inside someone's mind, and it tastes like the kindness flavor that big dragons taught about." The crew began to understand that Spark's people had evolved beyond the need for verbal communication in many situations, sharing thoughts and emotions directly, which explained the dragon's remarkable ability to sense their moods and respond appropriately, often offering comfort before anyone realized they needed it. As Spark continued to grow and develop, it began displaying abilities that went beyond telepathy, minor telekinesis that allowed it to manipulate small objects without touching them, and what appeared to be limited precognition, often preparing for events several minutes before they occurred, as if it could sense ripples in the fabric of causality. "The angry empire still hunts," Spark said suddenly during a routine maintenance shift, its scales flickering to warning colors of deep red and orange. "They have ships that taste thoughts across the dark spaces, and they remember the quantum signature of dragon minds. We must be careful, bottle friend, because they will come looking for the awakening." David felt his blood freeze as he realized that Spark's emergence from stasis might have sent some kind of signal that could be detected across interstellar distances, marking their location for the same forces that had destroyed the dragon civilization, and that his decision to help a baby dragon might have doomed his entire crew to face an enemy they couldn't possibly understand. The implications hit everyone. At the same time, they weren't just harboring a refugee from an extinct species, they were potentially harboring the key to technologies and knowledge that a galactic empire had been willing to commit genocide to suppress. And that empire might still be out there, still watching, still hunting for any sign that the dragons had survived. 2 weeks had transformed Spark from a creature the size of a cat into something approaching the dimensions of a large wolf, though its proportions remained graceful and elegant rather than bulky. With wings that had developed enough to allow short gliding flights around the cargo bay, much to the delight of the crew who had grown attached to their unusual passenger. The dragon's telepathic abilities had grown alongside its physical development, and Dr. Martinez documented incidents where Spark seemed to access not just inherited memories, but active connections to other survivors scattered across the galaxy, sometimes pausing mid-conversation to tilt its head as if listening to voices only it could hear. "There are others like me," Spark announced during the morning briefing, its scale shifting to hopeful shades of silver and blue. 12 young ones sleep in hidden places. 3 adults hide among the void dwellers beyond the rim, and 1 old teacher guards the memory vault in the dead system, where our homeworld used to sing with crystal voices. Captain Roberts had been wrestling with the decision of what to do about their discovery ever since Spark's warning about the hunting empire, but the revelation that more dragons survived changed everything. This was no longer just about protecting one refugee, but potentially about preserving an entire species from extinction. David had been monitoring the ship's sensor arrays for any signs of pursuit, and while nothing obvious appeared on their scopes, Spark's growing agitation suggested that something was tracking them through methods human technology couldn't detect, something that made the dragon pace restlessly and constantly check the viewports. "They taste thoughts across the dark," Spark explained when David asked about the hunter ships. "The angry empire learned to build machines that copy dragon sense, crude and painful like broken glass in the mind, but effective for hunting those who cannot hide their mental fire from the seeking eyes." Dr. Martinez's analysis of Spark's neural scans revealed that the dragon's brain operated on quantum principles that allowed for instantaneous communication across any distance, explaining how dragons could coordinate across galactic distances, but also why they couldn't easily hide from technology designed to detect quantum neural activity. The crew began to understand the scope of what they were dealing with when Spark shared more complete memories from its ancestors, images of the Dominion Empire spreading across the galaxy like a plague, consuming peaceful civilizations and enslaving species that couldn't defend themselves, while specifically targeting any race that showed telepathic or psychic abilities. "The angry ones fear what they cannot control," Spark said sadly. "They rule by making others afraid, but dragon mind cannot be made afraid in the same way. We see truth beneath lies, feel pain beneath anger, and this makes their power weak, so they decided we must not exist." Captain Roberts made the decision that would define the rest of their lives. Instead of trying to find a neutral port where they could transfer Spark to proper authorities, he ordered a course change toward Earth, betting that humanity's natural protective instincts would outweigh political concerns about antagonizing a galactic empire. The revelation that humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century, both surprised and encouraged Spark, who seemed to view humanity's relative innocence as a potential advantage, rather than a weakness in dealing with the Dominion's expansion. "Young races sometimes see solutions that old ones cannot," Spark observed while studying human historical databases. "The angry empire expects fear and submission, but humans have patterns of thought that taste like stubborn hope mixed with protective fury. This is why the big dragons wanted to teach your kind before the hunting began." David discovered that dragons had been observing human development for centuries, with several scout ships positioned near Earth's solar system, waiting for humanity to develop sufficient technology for peaceful contact. But the Dominion's systematic genocide campaign had disrupted those plans before first contact could occur. The ship's long-range sensors began detecting anomalous readings 3 days into their journey toward Earth, energy signatures that didn't match any known human or civilian vessel types, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested military organization and hostile intent, closing the distance at speeds that should have been impossible. "They come in ships that scream," Spark said, its scales darkening to warning colors of deep red and black. 6 hunter vessels and 1 mindbreaker command ship, designed for killing thoughts and silencing the voices that dare to speak of peace instead of conquest. "They have found our quantum fire trail." Dr. Martinez worked frantically to understand how the pursuing ships could track quantum neural activity. Discovering that the Dominion had apparently reverse-engineered captured dragon technology to create hunting sensors that could detect telepathic activity across interstellar distances, turning the dragon's greatest strength into a beacon for their enemies. Captain Roberts pushed the horizon's edge to maximum velocity, but even with emergency power diverted to the engines, their mining vessel was no match for purpose-built military ships designed for rapid pursuit across multiple star systems, and the gap between hunter and prey continued to shrink with each passing hour. The crew began preparing for the worst-case scenario, combat against an enemy they knew nothing about, defending a creature that represented the hope of an entire species while knowing that their own survival had become secondary to keeping Spark away from the forces that had already committed genocide once before. "I will not let them take you," David told Spark as they watched the pursuing ships grow larger on the sensor displays. "Whatever it takes, whatever the cost, you're under human protection now, and humans don't abandon their friends." Spark's response surprised everyone by its maturity and sadness. The young dragon had been growing not just physically and mentally but also emotionally, developing the wisdom and perspective that came from accessing the memories of its predecessors who had faced impossible choices during the final days of their civilization. "The big dragons tried to protect the small ones too," Spark said gently. "They hid us in crystal sleep pods and scattered us across the void, hoping some would survive long enough to find new friends who would help us grow strong again. Perhaps humans are the friends they hoped for." The ship's communications array suddenly crackled with an incoming transmission, and the crew found themselves facing their first direct contact with the Dominion Empire. A cold voice speaking perfect standard English, demanding the immediate surrender of what they called the Psychic Contamination Unit in exchange for the crew's survival commander Voss of the Dominion Hunter Fleet appeared on the main screen. A sharp-featured human whose eyes held the kind of certainty that came from never questioning orders, flanked by subordinates whose uniforms bore symbols that made Spark whimper and hide behind David's chair. "You have something that doesn't belong to free space," Commander Voss said with the tone of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "The creature you're harboring represents a threat to civilized order. Surrender it peacefully, and your vessel will be allowed to continue its mission with no further interference." David felt rage building in his chest as he realized that the man threatening them was human, that somewhere along the line his own species had apparently allied itself with the forces responsible for galactic genocide, and that the choice they faced wasn't just about protecting Spark, but about deciding what kind of people humanity wanted to be. Captain Roberts stood up slowly, looking directly into the camera as he delivered humanity's first official response to the Dominion Empire, words that would echo across the galaxy and define Earth's relationship with the stars for generations to come. "Commander Voss," Roberts said with quiet dignity, "the creature you're hunting asked for a bottle of water and said thank you. As far as I'm concerned, that makes it more civilized than you are." Commander Voss terminated the communication channel with the kind of cold efficiency that spoke of decades spent hunting prey across the galaxy, and within minutes the pursuing Dominion ships began spreading into attack formation. Their dark hulls bristling with weapons designed specifically for disabling rather than destroying. They wanted Spark alive, which gave the horizon's edge both an advantage and a terrifying glimpse into what awaited the dragon if captured. The mining vessel shuddered as warning shots streaked past their hull, energy beams that left glowing trails in the vacuum and seemed to carry an wrongness that made Spark cry out in pain, clutching its head as if the weapons themselves caused telepathic feedback that hurt to experience even at a distance. "The scream guns," Spark whispered, scales flickering between colors so rapidly they seemed to strobe. "They learned to make weapons that hurt the mind voice, that burn the thought paths, and leave only silence where songs used to live." The big dragons fell, not just from energy death but from having their inner light extinguished. Dr. Martinez monitored Spark's vital signs as the dragon struggled with the proximity of Dominion technology, discovering that the hunter ships weren't just using conventional weapons but some kind of psychic warfare system that specifically targeted telepathic nervous systems. Explaining how a peaceful species had been overwhelmed so completely, David found himself thinking tactically for the first time in his life, examining the ship's systems for anything that could be weaponized or used defensively, while Captain Roberts coordinated with Chief Engineer Rodriguez to squeeze every erg of power from engines that were never designed for military maneuvers. The Horizon's Edge dove into the asteroid field where Spark had been discovered, using the dense rock formations for cover while the crew tried to figure out how a mining vessel could possibly evade military ships that had been specifically designed for this kind of pursuit across multiple star systems. "Can you help us hide?" David asked Spark, remembering the dragon's growing psychic abilities, and was amazed when Spark nodded determinedly, scales shifting to deep purple concentrations that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. The dragon closed its eyes and extended its consciousness outward, wrapping the ship in what it called a quiet field, a telepathic dampening effect that made the Horizon's Edge effectively invisible to the quantum sensors the Dominion used for tracking psychic activity. Though the effort clearly exhausted Spark for 3 hours, they played a deadly game of hide-and-seek among the asteroids, with Dominion hunters sweeping back and forth through the field while the crew held their breath and watched their hidden passenger struggle to maintain the psychic camouflage that kept them alive. During a brief respite while the hunter ships searched a distant section of the asteroid belt, Spark shared more memories from its inherited knowledge, images of other species that had tried to help dragons escape the Dominion purge, peaceful civilizations that had been marked for cleansing, simply for offering aid to refugees. "The angry empire does not forgive kindness," Spark explained. "They believe helping dragons makes other species dangerous too. That telepathic contamination spreads like disease. Every world that sheltered my people was burned until nothing lived, and their names were erased from star maps." The crew began to understand that their decision to protect Spark had potentially marked humanity for the same fate that had befallen dozens of other species. But instead of fear, David felt a fierce pride in his captain's choice. If helping someone in need was a crime worthy of extinction, then the Dominion was exactly the kind of enemy worth fighting. Communications Officer Kim detected encrypted transmissions between the hunter ships, coded messages that suggested they were calling for reinforcements, while simultaneously reporting the discovery of a new psychic sympathetic species to higher command levels, confirming the crew's worst fears about the consequences of their choice. Captain Roberts made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of continuing to hide, he ordered a course toward the nearest inhabited system, gambling that the Dominion wouldn't risk exposing their operations by attacking a human vessel in full view of civilian populations and potential witnesses. The gamble almost worked, but Commander Voss proved more ruthless than Roberts had anticipated, launching a coordinated attack just as the Horizon's Edge reached the outer boundaries of the Kepler system, where civilian traffic and monitoring stations would normally deter military action by unknown forces. The mining ship's shields, designed for deflecting asteroid debris, held for exactly 47 seconds against weapons that had been used to exterminate advanced civilizations, and only Spark's desperate intervention prevented the crew from sharing the fate of countless other beings who had tried to protect dragons. The young dragon somehow managed to redirect the incoming energy streams, turning the Dominion's own weapons against their ships in a display of psychic power that left everyone speechless. But the effort cost Spark dearly. Blood began seeping from its nose and eyes, and its scales lost their lustrous color. "Too much," Spark gasped. "Still too small, too young. The big dragons could do this without hurting, but I am not ready for war thoughts, not strong enough to fight the scream ships without burning my own mind fire." Dr. Martinez worked frantically to stabilize Spark's condition while the damaged Dominion ships regrouped for another attack, and David realized that their only hope lay in reaching Earth before either the dragon collapsed from psychic exhaustion or the hunters called in enough reinforcements to overwhelm Spark's defensive abilities. The revelation that Spark's people had been the galaxy's peacekeepers, using their abilities to resolve conflicts and guide younger species away from destructive paths, made the Dominion's actions seem even more monstrous. They hadn't just committed genocide, they had deliberately eliminated the one force working to prevent galactic war. "We were teachers," Spark said weakly. "The big dragons helped others learn to reach for stars without destroying what they found, showed them how to grow without taking from neighbors. But the angry empire wanted to take everything, and they could not do that." while we helped others resist. The crew learned that dragons had been instrumental in establishing peaceful contact between dozens of species, creating trade networks and diplomatic protocols that had prevented conflicts for thousands of years, until the Dominion decided that peace was less profitable than conquest. As the horizon's edge limped toward Earth with hunter ships closing the distance, David found himself wondering if humanity had what it would take to fill the role the dragons had played. If his species could learn to be protectors rather than conquerors in a galaxy that desperately needed someone to stand against the darkness. Ships' long-range communications finally reached Earth's outer monitoring stations, and the response that came back filled the crew with hope and terror in equal measure. Admiral Zhang of Earth Defense Command acknowledged their situation and promised aid, but also warned that helping them might mean war with forces humanity barely understood. "Let them come," Captain Roberts said grimly, watching the Dominion ships gain ground while Spark struggled to maintain consciousness. "If they want to judge us for protecting someone who asked for a bottle of water, then they're about to learn what humans do to bullies." The outer Sol system erupted into frantic activity as Admiral Zhang's fleet moved to intercept the horizon's edge. But the pursuing Dominion ships arrived first, emerging from hyperspace in a formation that spoke of military precision and absolute confidence in their ability to claim their quarry regardless of human intervention. Earth's Defense Command found itself facing its first major interstellar crisis, with decisions that would determine not just Spark's fate, but humanity's place in a galaxy where showing compassion to refugees apparently warranted species-wide extinction. And the weight of that choice fell heavily on leaders who had never imagined such consequences. Admiral Zhang established communication with both Captain Roberts and Commander Voss simultaneously, creating a three-way conference that laid bare the stark realities of the situation. The Dominion demanded immediate surrender of the psychic contaminant, while the crew of the Horizon's Edge pleaded for sanctuary and protection. "You harbor a creature whose very existence threatens galactic stability," Commander Voss stated with the absolute certainty of someone who had never questioned orders. The telepathic plague that nearly consumed civilized space was eliminated through great sacrifice. Allowing it to spread again would doom millions. Spark, still weakened from the psychic battle but determined to speak for itself, managed to establish a telepathic link with Admiral Zhang that allowed the Earth commander to experience memories directly from the dragon's inherited knowledge. Images of peaceful dragon cities, of species learning cooperation instead of conquest, of the systematic genocide that had eliminated the galaxy's greatest force for peace. The revelation hit Earth's leadership like a physical blow when they realized that the Dominion's version of history was completely inverted. Dragons hadn't been a plague-threatening civilization. They had been the immune system that kept galactic civilization healthy, and the great sacrifice Voss spoke of was actually the murder of billions of innocent beings. President Foster convened an emergency session of the Global Defense Council, knowing that the decision they made in the next few hours would define humanity's future relationship with the stars. While outside Earth's atmosphere, Dominion ships waited with the patience of predators, certain of their prey. David watched Spark struggle to stay conscious as the dragon used its remaining strength to share more memories with Earth's leaders, not just images of destruction, but visions of what the galaxy had been like before the Dominion's rise, when conflicts were resolved through understanding rather than force. "The big dragons never forced peace," Spark whispered, scales barely glowing with residual energy. "They showed others the cost of war, helped them see paths that led to growth instead of destruction. But some chose destruction anyway, and when the dragons could not stop them, the angry ones decided teachers must die." Dr. Martinez reported that Spark's neural activity was approaching dangerous levels, with quantum brain patterns fluctuating wildly as the dragon tried to maintain telepathic contact across the vast distances needed to communicate with Earth. Pushing its young mind beyond safe limits in a desperate attempt to save its species, the Global Defense Council faced an impossible choice: risk humanity's safety by protecting the last dragons, or preserve Earth's neutrality by surrendering Spark to forces that had already committed galactic genocide, knowing that either choice would define what kind of species humans wanted to become. Admiral Zhang found himself remembering every military history course he had ever taken, every lesson about the cost of appeasement and the price of standing against evil, while staring at sensor readings that showed Dominion reinforcements arriving at the edge of the solar system. What happens if we surrender the dragon? Admiral Zhang asked Commander Voss directly, and the answer came with a coldness that chilled everyone listening. Spark would be subjected to psychic sterilization procedures designed to eliminate its telepathic abilities before being studied, for intelligence about other survivors. The realization that the Dominion intended to lobotomize Spark, turning a sentient being into a living laboratory specimen, galvanized human public opinion in ways that political arguments about galactic stability never could have achieved. President Foster's speech to the Global Defense Council became the defining moment of human space policy. Words that would be remembered for generations as the point where humanity chose its path among the stars, with full knowledge of the consequences. We are being asked to choose between safety and conscience, Foster said, between preserving our own comfort and protecting someone who has done nothing wrong except exist. And if that is the choice we face, then the answer is simple. The vote was unanimous, though many council members wept as they cast ballots that they knew might doom their own species. Earth would grant full sanctuary to Spark and any other dragon survivors, regardless of Dominion threats, because some principles were worth dying for. Commander Voss received Earth's decision with the kind of cold fury that spoke of someone whose absolute certainty had been challenged for the first time in decades, and his response confirmed humanity's worst fears about the forces they now faced. You have chosen extinction, Voss said simply. The Dominion cannot allow psychic contamination to spread. Your species will be added to the cleansing list, and your worlds will burn until nothing remains that might harbor telepathic sympathies. Admiral Zhang ordered Earth's fleet to battle stations, knowing that they faced technology centuries ahead of their own, while across the planet, civilians looked up at stars that had suddenly become much more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. Spark used the last of its strength to send a quantum pulse message across the galaxy, a telepathic cry for help that reached the handful of dragon survivors hiding in the void, letting them know that humanity had chosen to stand with them against the darkness. The bottle friend said yes, Spark whispered, before collapsing into unconsciousness. They will fight for the small ones like the big dragons did. Perhaps the galaxy can have teachers again. The first shots of what historians would later call the Dragon War erupted as Dominion ships opened fire on Earth's outer defense platforms, and Admiral Zhang realized that humanity's greatest test wasn't going to be technological or tactical, but moral, whether they could become the protectors the galaxy needed without losing the compassion that had made them worth protecting in the first place. David held Spark's unconscious form while the ship shook under enemy fire, watching human ships position themselves between the Dominion fleet and Earth, and felt a fierce pride in his species' choice even as he wondered if any of them would survive to see the consequences. The battle for Earth's soul had begun, but more importantly, the battle for the galaxy's future was finally underway, with humanity stepping into the role the dragons had once filled, not as conquerors or rulers, but as those willing to stand between predators and their prey, no matter the cost. The Battle of Sol lasted 18 hours and changed the course of galactic history. Not because humanity won through superior firepower, the Dominion ships were indeed centuries ahead of Earth technology, but because Spark's quantum pulse distress call had awakened something the Empire thought they had successfully destroyed forever. Admiral Zhang watched in amazement as ships emerged from hyperspace around the battleground. Vessels of designs he had never seen before, crewed by species that had been hiding in the galactic rim for generations, all responding to the telepathic cry that announced dragons had found new protectors willing to fight. The hidden survivors came in desperate waves, the crystalline builders who had constructed dragon cities, the energy beings called weavers who had helped maintain peace between organic species, the ancient guardians whose massive ships had been sleeping in dead systems for centuries, waiting for a signal that the galaxy might be ready for peace again. Commander Voss found his overwhelming tactical advantage evaporating as refugee fleets emerged from hiding places across known space. Species that the Dominion had marked for extermination but had never managed to completely eliminate, all converging on Soul in the greatest concentration of psychic sympathizers the galaxy had seen since the original purge. David watched from the medical bay where Spark lay unconscious, the dragon's vital signs finally stabilizing as other telepathic minds joined the quantum network, sharing the psychic load that had been overwhelming the young creature's developing abilities. Dr. Martinez documented the miraculous recovery as Spark's neural patterns synchronized with the approaching dragon survivors. 3 adults and 12 juveniles emerging from various hiding places, their combined telepathic field creating a harmony that seemed to heal not just Spark but the very space around Earth. The turning point came when the ancient Guardian ships activated technologies that the Dominion had never encountered, weapons that didn't destroy but rather convinced enemy crews to question their orders, psychic fields that made violence seem not just wrong but literally unthinkable. "We never left," explained Elder Wisewing, the oldest surviving dragon, her massive form barely fitting in the horizon's edge's cargo bay. "We waited in the dark spaces between thoughts, hoping someday young races would grow strong enough to choose protection over conquest." Commander Voss's fleet found itself facing an impossible situation. Their scream weapons, designed to cause telepathic feedback, were useless against the combined psychic shielding of multiple species working in harmony, while their crews began experiencing doubt about the righteousness of their mission for the first time in their military careers. The Dominion commander made one final attempt to complete his mission, launching a direct assault on Earth itself, but found his ships caught in what the dragons called a compassion field, a telepathic effect that made it impossible to target civilian populations while feeling the fear and hope of everyone. Below Admiral Zhang seized the moment, broadcasting on all frequencies an offer that would echo across the galaxy. Earth declared itself a sanctuary world for any species fleeing Dominion persecution, and humanity pledged its growing fleet to protect those who could not protect themselves. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with refugee ships from dozens of systems changing course towards Sol, bringing with them technologies and knowledge that had been preserved in secret for generations, turning Earth into the center of a new alliance based on cooperation rather than conquest. Spark awakened 3 days later to find the solar system transformed into the greatest gathering of peaceful species in living memory, with dragon young playing alongside human children in the orbital habitats that were being constructed to house the growing refugee population. "Bottle friend," Spark said, immediately looking for David. "The big dragons say thank you, not just for the water, but for choosing to be teachers instead of takers, for showing the galaxy that kindness is stronger than fear." David discovered that his role had evolved from maintenance engineer to something much more significant. As Spark's first human contact, he had become an unofficial ambassador between species, helping to establish the communication protocols that would govern the new alliance. The Dominion Empire found itself facing a complete strategic reversal as worlds across the galaxy began declaring independence and requesting protection from the Sol Alliance, while their own crews increasingly questioned orders to attack civilians and refugees. Elder Wisewing shared the great revelation that changed everything. Dragons had always known that telepathic abilities would eventually emerge in most intelligent species given enough time, and they had been preparing the galaxy for the day when psychic communication would become normal rather than feared. "Humans are the bridge species," Wisewing explained to the assembled alliance leaders, "not yet fully telepathic but capable of understanding both sides. You can speak to those who fear mind touch while protecting those who possess it." The establishment of the Dragon Restoration Project became humanity's greatest achievement, with Earth serving as a training ground where young dragons learned to use their abilities for healing and protection, while human children grew up understanding that telepathy was a gift to be nurtured rather than feared. Spark, now approaching adult size but still carrying the maintenance bottle that had marked the beginning of everything, became the first dragon in generations to grow up without fear, surrounded by friends who valued its abilities as tools for peace rather than weapons for control. The Dominion Empire didn't collapse overnight, but something more powerful than military defeat began spreading through their territory. The knowledge that alternatives existed, that species could choose cooperation over conquest, and that the psychic plague they had fought so hard to eliminate was actually the cure for galactic violence. Admiral Zhang found himself commanding not just Earth's fleet but a growing armada of converted worlds, refugee species, and former Dominion soldiers who had abandoned their posts rather than continue fighting a war they no longer believed in. The first dragon-human telepathic link between Spark and David became the template for a new kind of diplomatic relationship, one where misunderstandings could be resolved through shared experience rather than negotiation, where empathy became a practical tool for preventing conflict. Commander Voss himself became an unexpected convert when exposure to the Alliance's compassion fields allowed him to experience the memories of his victims, leading to his eventual defection and testimony about Dominion war crimes that would help establish the new galactic justice system. Years later, David often stood in the gardens of New Dragon City, watching Spark teaching young beings of various species how to use telepathy for healing rather than harm, while human and dragon children played together with an ease that suggested the future would be very different from the past. The maintenance bottle still sat on Spark's shelf, now in a place of honor, but its significance had grown beyond a simple drink offered to a thirsty creature. It had become the symbol of the moment when humanity chose to be defined by kindness rather than fear. "What are you thinking about, bottle friend?" Spark asked, approaching David with the graceful movement of a fully grown dragon, scales shimmering with contentment and health. David smiled, remembering the scared maintenance engineer who had discovered a crystal pod in an asteroid field, never imagining that offering water to a baby dragon would lead to the transformation of galactic civilization. "Just thinking about how far we've come," David replied, "and wondering what other bottles are waiting out there in the dark, holding the next chance for someone to choose kindness over fear." Spark's scales shifted to the warm gold color that meant happiness, and together they watched the sun set over a world where dragons flew freely through skies protected by human ships, where former enemies worked side by side to build something better than either could have achieved alone. The galaxy was far from perfect, and there would always be those who chose conquest over cooperation, but for the first time in generations, there were guardians watching, teachers ready to help, and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could change the course of history itself.